Hi, it's Matthew Dixon of MindDay.ca, and I want to tell you the story of, I call it the gift of maybe. And I wrote this up on Medium.com, my profile on Medium.com. I've got my story there. I call it the gift of maybe. If you look up my name and the gift of maybe, you can find that written up. And I led an average life as a youth, nothing too out of the ordinary for what I went through. And it was a decent life. I didn't have much hardship. And when I was in my second year of university, my mom had clipped out an article from the newspaper saying, "You can pedal across Canada," and it talked about this group that bicycled across Canada each year, and you could sign up to do that trip. And I thought, oh, well, that's kind of neat. And how many times do you see something like that? Some article about somebody climbing a mountain or rowing across an ocean or all sorts of things going on all the time. Anyway, I filed it away in my drawer. My parents were usually sending me clippings from the newspaper back in this would have been the 80s and 90s. And anyway, a year later, in my in my dorm room in my university, and I was going through my drawer and I found that article again. But this time I looked at it differently. And I read the article again. At the end of the article, there was a phone number to call if you wanted more information. This would have been the fall of '91, before the internet was around, so no websites. And anyway, I thought, I wonder if I could do that trip. I wonder if I could do that. And I thought about it. I'd read the article and I just was thinking about it in my dorm room. And I thought, maybe I could do that. Maybe I could do that. They said you didn't have to be of average, they said anyone of average physical fitness could do the trip. If you logged 2,000 kilometers in April, May, and June, you could do the trip in July and August of that year, of '92 coming up. So I thought about it, and it wasn't very long, just within a matter of minutes from my memory, I was on the phone. I phoned the phone number and talked to somebody on the other line, the organizers, and they said they could send me a duotang with more 20, 30, 40 pages of information about the trip. And I said, cool, that's great, thanks. So that's all I did. It was free. It didn't cost anything to make maybe a bit of money to make the call back then. And they sent me the duotang in the mail. And I thought, wow, that's cool, I actually did that. I wasn't one to phone people or go after things that much as a youth. I wasn't that I wasn't really a go-getter in some ways. I mean, some people have businesses when they're young and they're always involved more in the community and whatnot. I wasn't really like that, so making a phone call was sort of more out of the ordinary for me. Anyway, it was very exciting. I looked forward to the day when I would get the pamphlet, the duotang with the information in the mail. So anyway, the day came and I got the duotang. I was very excited about it. I went down to the meal hall at my university and said, I'll go read it while I have dinner. So there I was sitting in the meal hall eating my dinner, reading this duotang. And they said if you wanted to do the trip, you could sign up for it for putting something like $100 down and you could reserve a spot on the trip. And if nobody else wanted if you wanted to back out, you could give your spot up to somebody else. You could get your $100 back if there was someone who would want to take your spot. If there wasn't anybody who wanted to take your spot, you wouldn't get your $100 back. But $100 isn't that much money, so I put it in the mail. I sent it off and I reserved a spot back probably November '91, and the trip would have been in '92, the summer. So that winter, I started telling people I've signed up to bike across Canada, and all of a sudden there's this buzz, and I know my nickname is Buzz, but there's this buzz about Buzz, and saying Matthew's going to bike across Canada. Matthew's going to bike across Canada, and it was neat. It was neat to have that sort of, I guess that was confidence starting to build inside me of, I guess I'm going to do this, and I had this feeling through the winter and before the trip, and all the time before the start of the trip was, I had this background. I wouldn't call it anxiety. It was just more a feeling of, Matthew, what are you doing? What are you doing here? And it was more. I'd also have a feeling of, bike across Canada. Who signed you up for this? I'd ask myself that. Who signed you up for this, Matthew? Well, I did. I signed up for this. So, anyway, the winter came and went, and in April I started biking. I did the required training in April, May, and June. And then I flew out to Vancouver, and that's where the trip started. And I have some relatives out there. I stayed with them. And the day of the trip, my alarm clock went off. The first morning I was staying at my relative's house, and my alarm clock went off. Up until that time, every single day leading up to that trip, I was always saying, I'm going to bike across Canada. I'm going to. It was in the future. But that morning when the alarm clock went off, I said, you know what? It's not in the future anymore. It's today. It's now and happening soon in the next couple hours. It's by the end of today, I'll have biked 100 kilometers or so outside Vancouver, and I'll be on the trip. It's today. It's not tomorrow. It's today. And it was a very powerful, strong feeling. And it was even more so like that when my uncle was driving me to where we were going to meet up at the UBC campus residence on campus. And so he was driving me through Vancouver. I'd never been across Canada before. I grew up on the east coast of Canada, and I remember flying over Canada on the way there, just looking out the window thinking, my heavens, I'm going to bike across all of this? Wow. Canada just looked immensely huge out the window of the airplane. So anyway, I went to the university residence. We met up in the lobby, and there were other people. There were 46 of us biking across Canada that summer. And there were the organizers of the trip there, the trucks. We had a minivan and a larger truck to haul our gear. So we started meeting up with people. We sat down. They went through all the rules and everything, and eventually we got started. So people were meeting up. I mean, these were all people who didn't know. None of us knew any of us to begin with, for the most part, and we were all strangers to each other. And I met up with a girl about my age. I was 20, she was 24, and she said, do you want to bike together? I'm like, sure. So we were the youngest on the trip. There was a girl who was 17, and she was biking with her mom. But Jill and I, we were the youngest. There were a bunch of guys in their late 20s, and they ended up biking together a lot of the time. It was we formed a lot of cliques in the group, people who like to bike with each other, groups of 2, 3, 4, 5 people. Some French people, they tended to bike with each other a lot. And by age range was another thing. People in their 60s bike together, people in their 30s bike together. It was sort of some loose groups like that. And anyway, Jill and I biked the trip together for the most part, and groups would interlap with each other. You'd bike with some other groups one day or for part of the day. And anyway, so when we were standing there, we loaded our gear on the trucks, and some people had started taking off. They said, they formed little groups that would probably stay that way for the rest of the trip for the most part. And they started biking off, and you'd hear hoops and hollers of, woo, we're doing it, we're starting the trip, woo. So anyway, at some point, Jill and I said to each other, well, do you want to start? So I said, sure. So I got on my bike, I straddled my bike, and we each had our gear for the day on our bike, or back, our little back bag, whatever you call it, uh, rear whatever bag on our bike with our gear for the day, food and camera and rain jacket sort of thing. And I got on the bike and said, okay, well, let's start. So I I took one pedal and went maybe what, a meter or 2 meters, however far you go with one pedal stroke. And then I took another pedal stroke and another, and I'd started the trip. And Jill was doing the same thing. So I I don't know how many millions of pedal strokes I took on that trip, but it was in the order of millions. And we did make it all the way to St. John's, Newfoundland. And but that one very first pedal stroke, I remember so well in my mind, because I took it and I went just a matter of feet in front of me. And I'm like, I just went a matter of feet. And Newfoundland is 7,000 kilometers away. It seems so small and insignificant. I can't, it's just so unbelievably small and insignificant. I I never traveled across Canada before other than the airplane. It's hard for anybody, except maybe astronauts uh, flying over the world in the ISS, to understand how big the world is. And astronauts will tell you the world is a lot smaller than you actually think. And I can talk about that, and that's another aspect of my trip that I'd like to tell people. It's not as hard as you think once you've done it. Once you start doing it, you realize it's a lot easier than you think. But that one first pedal stroke, it stood out in my mind so much. Not the second or the third or the fourth or the fifth, that first one. And the old saying, a journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step. I think whoever said that had walked 1,000 miles, and he or she knew. So anyway, that one little question in my mind back in my dorm room, saying, maybe I could do this. Maybe I could bike across Canada. Maybe I could do this. I call it the gift of maybe. Another aspect of this is that I learned that at any point I could have backed out of the trip. I could have said, you know what, I'm done the training. I don't want to do the training anymore. I quit. I could have flown out to Vancouver and say, you know what, I don't want to do the trip. I'm out here, but I'm just going home. I could have been in BC and say, you know what, I've biked a bit, but I don't want to do the trip anymore. I'm going home. I could have been almost to the very end of Newfoundland saying, you know what, I'm tired and I want to go home. Like Forrest Gump, I'm tired. I think I'll go home now. But there's so many options to back out. And even when I when I gave $100 in the mail to reserve a spot on the trip, that didn't mean anything. I always had a spot to back out. And knowing that, yes, you are committed to doing the trip, but in other ways, you don't have to be totally committed. You can always back out if you want. But out on the trip, when I was biking, I didn't want to quit. I wanted to do this. And when it was raining, biking isn't always the funnest. Isn't that much fun when it's raining, but I did it anyway. There were times when bugs were bad. There were times when there were close calls with vehicles, and you had to watch it so you didn't get hit. But other than that, the trip was fun. And there's a book called Miles from Nowhere that was written back in the 80s, I believe. And it was about a couple who biked around the world. And they were asked later, the lady who wrote the book, she was asked later in her life, like, why did you do the trip? And she said what she wanted to tell people was, because it's fun. But she felt she couldn't say that because it would sound too flippant. And I just enjoyed it. It was a lot of fun. And I'm so glad I did that trip. It gave me confidence. I did that trip when I was 20, And still to this day, when I'm at 49, I've told people about that trip, people I meet all the time throughout my life. I tell them about that trip, and it's like I had just done it yesterday. Their jaws dropped. Like, you did what? You biked across Canada? It's like you walked on the moon or something. People, people, the story just never has gotten old. I get as much excitement and enthusiasm out of hearing someone hear that I did that. It's like the story has just never gotten old, and I didn't expect that. I didn't even really know what to expect when I was in my later years, still telling people about this story. Anyway, that's my gift of maybe story. It's a gift just to say maybe I could do this. I don't have it all worked out. I don't know when you're starting this, you don't know how it's going to go. You don't know if it'll work out. You don't know how you're going to do it. But just saying maybe I could do that. Maybe. And taking small steps towards doing that. Just taking small steps. And that's all biking across Canada really was. Just a bunch of small steps. Pedal strokes. Small pedal strokes. They didn't get very far. Each pedal stroke only took me a matter of feet or meters at most. And that's it. Biking across Canada, there weren't many remote spots. For the most part, we followed the Trans-Canada Highway or the secondary roads along in the same, like nearby. We tried to stay in routes that were as safe as possible, but still following the main sort of path of the Trans-Canada Highway. And there were towns, cities, one after another, and it sort of felt like you were hopping from one backyard to another, one neighborhood to another. And there's another tour you can do, biking up to the Arctic through the Yukon, BC and the Yukon, the Dempster Highway. There are much more remote spots on that. Biking across Canada, you're not too far from civilization. There are cars coming up along the side of the highway, and now with phone technology, you're not that far from anybody. I did that trip back when there were no phone. Well, we didn't have cell phones back then. So if we wanted to, we had phone booths and flagging a vehicle down. That's what we had for if we needed to get in touch with somebody. So anyway, I've told that story, parts of that story. I've told people about my bike trip for years. I always enjoyed doing it. I try not to do it in a boastful manner. I try to tell the story to inspire other people to not be afraid to do things that they might otherwise be afraid to do. It's following your dreams doesn't have to be as hard and as difficult as you think. Things can be fun. I was amazed at how much easier that trip was than I thought it would be. It was daunting waiting to do the trip. It was daunting. But once I was out there, I'm like, wow, why isn't everybody doing this? This is so much fun and so much easier than I thought. So I know for people following their dreams, there's a time for hard work and perseverance. And with my disease that hit when I was 22, when I was biking across Canada, I remember thinking, I could do more than this. I'm biking, but it's not maxing me out. But my disease with schizophrenia, that maxed me out like you wouldn't believe. I'd never had to push myself so hard in my entire life. So it just maxed out, always maxed out. And biking across Canada in comparison was literally a walk in the park. It was a lot simpler than that. So if you've ever wanted to do a long distance trip like that, or do anything I encourage you to do it. It will be, that trip put a lot of wind in my sails. It gave me a lot of confidence. And I remember thinking when I got sick with schizophrenia, maybe if I could bike across Canada, maybe I could get through schizophrenia. Maybe I could do that. So that gift of maybe can last a long time. Who knows? Who knows where just saying maybe to something, how that might benefit you further down the road. Anyway, that's my gift of maybe story. Hope it's given you some inspiration. See ya.